Assessor Properties Exemption Workshop. We are pleased to have you for this second exemption workshop in partnership with our governing body, the Comptroller of the Treasury State Board of Equalization. Before we get started, let us provide you with a little housekeeping. I think you probably already have been given the housekeeping for this workshop, but just want to make sure you know which way to go and where things are. There's free coffee, water, sandwiches, no judgment zone. Take as much as you like, eat as much as you like. It's Friday. Why don't you go ahead and live a little? How about that? And as for the women and men's bathroom, they are located outside the double doors. You entered, turn to the right and to your left through the doors under the stairway. Now let's get to it. As you know, my incredible staff of the Office of the Assessor of Property, we're responsible for, and I've stated in our mission statement and all over Davidson County, wherever we go, to accurately identify, list, appraise, and classify all taxable properties in an effort to achieve fairness and equity in values for the preparation of the annual assessment roll in a timely manner, while educating property owners of the appraisal process of their options, to appeals, as well as to learn of available assistance programs. We take this responsibility serious. We know that the payment of taxes on commercial, residential, and personal T properties is the most stable income stream of any city or county. The payment of taxes starts with a value assessed by my office, our office. I don't see it as me, but as we. So it's fitting that our social media hashtag is We Value Nashville, Davidson County. We value you. The Assessor of Property Office of Assessment is charged with other responsibilities as well. This is where you would change your address to receive information regarding your assessment value and to ensure that your tax bill goes to the right place. We don't want to hear you say, the dog ate my tax bill. This is also where you get your value every 4 years as a result of the reappraisal. The next reappraisal will be in 2025. After my election of 2024? Okay. Well, I didn't ask for your vote, but hey, why not? But I'm on the job. I can't do that. Sorry. But yes, this is where you can appeal your values, not only because in the reappraisal year, but you can appeal your property value every year. In the Assessor of Properties office is where you will call to have damages to your home or business that you believe that the damages will not allow your property to be operative or be in operation or be livable by the September year. This is where you call to speak with us about the damages you may have. This is also where you call for your personal T account. If you've obtained a business license from the county clerk, you will call here to set up your license so that you will pay timely for the personalty items that are used in your business. These are just a few of the additional responsibilities. In a nutshell, the Office of the Assessor of Property is the keeper of the county's $2,073,098, not $274,000, but $2,073,000. $200,073,000 and 273. I'm getting confused here in my tongue tie. 273,098 parcels. Yes, because sometimes we would say 274,000 parcels, and that is growing of the more of just not only the taxable properties, but we also keep count of the non-taxable properties as well. As for this exemption workshop, this is the office that serves as the designated entity to work on exemptions with our governing body, the State Board of Equalization. Now, in the year 2017, shortly after I was elected, I began to be faced with, or really rather say our office began to be faced with a lot of matters of concerns of various churches, hospitals, a number of not-for-profit entities receiving unexpected tax bills. What I found was that some entities had employees who had been retired, and they were left with new employees not knowing about the exemptions. or the organization was exempted but had properties that was no longer in the same location that they were before. We met and worked and helped resolve all of these concerns. As a result of one of the matter of concerns, the idea to conduct this workshop was born. Further, in the midst of our self-audit on already exempted entities that we were conducting, and we continue to meet some of the conclusions of those audits by getting those entities to share with us or tell us how were they exempted. We continue with that even to this day. So as a result of that requirement on ourselves, we established the Compliance Division. The manager of the Compliance Division, Herman Rubin, where are you, Herman? There he is, back there in the back. He has served as with the Assessor of Properties Office. I do this every time, Herman. How many years? Was it 45 years? 13 years next month. Awesome. Herman, you waved your hand. I was going to tell you to stand. Please make yourself known to Herman Rubin. Also, we have Christina Ratcliffe. There she is. The beautiful Christina Ratcliffe. She's our section leader for the Compliance Division. She's a fireball, so I'm going to tell you, if you need something done, you can call Christina as well. And she's been with our office 16 years. Christina, thank you so much. And then, of course, very recently, but not too far recently, we have also in our division, there you are, Miss Danielle. Miss Danielle, I don't have Danielle up there, do I? We didn't put Danielle. We have to do better than that. Yes, but it's been so recent. But yes, we have Danielle who have joined us, and we are so happy to have her in the Compliance Division. She has come to us from and that's the reason why, she had come to us from the Appeals and Modeling Division, and we just saw a lot of the amazing skills that Danielle Hancock has. So we definitely felt that she would be nothing but an asset in our Compliance Division. Please turn around and take a look at this beautiful lady. Thank you so much, Danielle. So now, our next speaker, which we're going to have come up, who is also in the Compliance Division. We kind of debated on whether we're going to make him the Compliance Advocate or the Compliance Liaison. We're not quite sure about the title, but we know one thing. He's pretty damn good when it comes to working with all of our entities that are seeking to be exempted. John Cantrell, he serves as the liaison for me to the State Board of Equalization. I'm so happy to have him. And he has a wealth of knowledge in reference to the exemption application, in reference to how this works, and give you some idea what our governing body could definitely see as not as a way to be exempted, or what they could see as the criteria to be exempted. Please welcome John Cantrell, our compliance advocate of the Compliance Division.
Thank you, ma'am. You can't curse at an exemption seminar. It is an honor to be in this room with you all. The list of people that registered and the list of people that are here, you represent what makes Nashville so great. There are various religious organizations in this room. There are charitable organizations in this room. There are educational as well. We thank you. All of us in Nashville and Davidson County, thank you for what you do. And one of the things that we want to see you have the opportunity to do is do what you do best, which is serve the people of Nashville and Davidson County. And to the extent that we can get out of your way, and to the extent that we can help you in that by getting out of your way, we want to do that. I am a bivocational minister myself, and when this position came open, I was doing something else, and the assessor at the time thought it would be a good fit, and it has been a joy to be able to get to know all of the exemptable organizations in Davidson County. It's interesting, the mentality that when I first took this position that we had in our assessor's office compared to now. And it really is a position and an attitude that is pretty universal, and that is the assessor's office really doesn't want to have a whole lot of exemptions simply because that takes away from the tax base. We in Davidson County can go back quite a ways to an assessor that took on churches by putting on all the parsonages back on the tax roll to challenge the exemption of parsonages. I had a beloved coworker who used to rib me, but his saying to me was, John, Jesus had to pay his taxes. How about the bride pay hers? And that really was the mentality until Mrs. Wilhoit came. And she came in as an advocate of advocates for the nonprofits in Davidson County. And she was determined if you qualified for an exemption, she was going to make sure that you got it. And she made it her business to make sure that Nashville and Davidson County knew about this exemption. And she, as she will say here in just a minute, even to her personal friendships, followed people wherever they were to say, did you turn in an application? You are eligible. And she will ask often, I saw so-and-so at a meeting and they need an application. She will circle back around. Did they get that back to you? I will call them now to make sure that they get what they deserve and what they are entitled to. So we are so thankful for the leadership here in our office and in this county to Mrs. Wilhoit and all that she means to all of us and all the ways that she is helping. As she said, we had a self-audit, and that doesn't mean a thing to you all, but we get audited every year, and we have to produce the paperwork and the documents that proves that a parcel is exempted the right way. And there are several on our system that were so old that there were really no documents. The church where I preach, the congregation where I preach, began in 1812. And through this process, I say, Davy Crockett didn't make us turn in any applications back in those days. So even we had to turn in an application. But in that process, I will tell you, and I know it's frustrating to be exempted and be exempted all those years and still have to go through that. But in that process, what a joy it has been for our office to get to meet all of the people associated with these nonprofits. And I can all the stories that come to my mind of the difference that each of you are making in this county. I think of a minister who was new to Nashville. He decided, it was in East Nashville, he went across the street to the high school, to Stratford High School, and met the coach over there and wanted to get to know the team. He got to know the team and he went back to his congregation. He said, I think they're going to let me sort of be a motivational speaker, chaplain type figure. And he said, could we make a meal? So every home game, he made this congregation made a meal for the team. That led to every home game of every team, the congregation would make a meal. And this wasn't a large congregation. And the lady said, we haven't had a lot of uptick in attendance on Sunday mornings, but on Wednesday nights, we've had 10 to 15 students come and join us in our service. And I thought, well, what a great story. What difference does a small congregation make? Well, the rest of the story, she said, there was a threat, some sort of a terrorism type threat, bomb threat happening at the school. And thanks to this one minister reaching out, the principal was able to call the minister and say, can we come over to your church house and make it a safe place for our students to come? You talk about what a difference just one organization can make. Another organization came in this process. He said, we have 10 members. And you think, what could 10 members do? They decided to go out to minister to the homeless. And as they started doing that, they started helping these homeless people find their families. And they had returned several homeless people back to their families who they had lost touch with. And in the process of putting up a tent, putting out some water and some snacks, inviting people to worship service, they met a lady who, as it turned out, was in a family way. And when she delivered her baby, the hospital called the minister and said, either you come and take the baby or we're going to have to submit this child to social services. And as a result of that, one church, 10 members, that baby received adoption. So it's incredible, the stories that have come through. Of course, we also had one always sticks out in my mind of a man who called when he got the audit. He just saw audit. And he called and he said, John, I'm so sorry. We have been leasing out our parking spaces for profit, and I knew we needed to turn that in, and now I see that you're auditing us. And I said, whoa, stop confessing. We're not auditing you, we're auditing ourselves. So please be careful what you say. And he went ahead and told us and complied. It is my privilege to be able to often be the phone call, receive the phone call from someone saying, we got a tax bill we don't think we should pay. And in no way do I make a determination, but I try to help facilitate that and try to connect you, the representative of a wonderful organization, to the state board that you will meet in just a moment in Miss Bennett. But Miss Bennett will tell you that she's got the magic pen. I don't have the magic pen. I cannot make you exempt like she can, but I can help you with that process and submitting an application, in knowing what types of things are exempt. And sometimes we get calls, I'm thinking about doing something great for Nashville. I'm thinking about a low-income housing project. Well, don't we need more of those? And I just want to know about the tax liability, and I can connect you to the state board and get you the information you need to make those important decisions. So we are so thankful to be in this role. We want, bottom line, we want everybody who is eligible to receive the benefit of the exemption for the benefit of all of us. And so it is an honor to be able to do that. So if you call, I will certainly help fill out applications. I'll certainly help through the process. And most often, it's not as easy as you would think it would be. Sometimes it is. Sometimes somebody gets a property, they call in a timely manner. Oftentimes, there's always an issue, it seems like. And when there is, we work through it together. And ultimately, the state and the county are agreed that we will fight as hard as we can for you within the law to make sure that you get what you are entitled to. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Well, y'all can give it up better than that. But John is an advocate. Come on. Yes. So we thank you, John. And as you can see, John is truly a compliance advocate, and he's one of our valued employees. Now, what or how is the exemption workshop is going to help you? You may be saying, I already have an exemption. How will this help my not-for-profit or church entity? Or you may be starting a not-for-profit or a church entity. To better help you see the connection, I have a couple of examples. Reverend Representative Harold Moses Love Jr., pastor and also House Representative of here in Nashville, but he's the pastor of Lee Chapel AME Church. And his and Representative Love and his congregation found itself in a pretty bad situation. They had received a tax bill to the tune of about $25,000, somewhere, could have been about $35,000, right? So this unexpected tax bill was pretty, confusing to them and as well as to us, but we knew there was something that had not been done. After our research and working with the Comptroller of the Treasury, what happened was that their church, Lee Chapel, the older facility, had moved across the street. If you're familiar with North Nashville, it no longer sits in the location, its original location. It moved across the street, and across the street from where they moved became a parking lot. So because just that alone, with an exemption, it doesn't follow the property. When the property changes for what you got your exemption to represent, once that changes, you should be asking yourself the question, should I apply again? Maybe I need to contact the assessor's office and find out, will this, send up a red flag and have a bill come to my business? And that's exactly what happened. So, we worked with the comptroller's office and we worked with the state of Tennessee legislature because there was a couple of things, because they had missed some deadline dates. So even when we say appeal your property, in that opportunity time, you can bring up exemptions as well. And because those dates had passed, the deadlines had passed, they could no longer appeal, but they had to do some other type of legislation that could allow them to go back even further. But that's just one example. And then there's the story of the amazing Trina Frierson. I don't know if you know this young lady, but she is absolutely amazing. And she has really had a journey for all of us to just be inspired by. She's the president and CEO of the Mending Hearts, and her story exemplifies redemption. Trina founded Mending Hearts in 2004. In its infancy, Mending Hearts owned one home, and treated 7 women. The program has now grown to 15 homes and has served over 5,000 women, and is becoming a critical resource for treating women in Middle Tennessee. It was essential to Trina to not only help individuals, but to also transform her community. And she played a very intricate role in not only transforming her community, but also West Nashville. Trina turned inhabitable dwellings into homes filled with love to bring healing and beautification to her community and women in it. You probably heard me just say she had how many homes at one time? 15 homes. Well, she has a whole lot more than that. When I met Trina had those 15 homes. Guess what? Those facilities were not exempted. She had had them for quite a while. Trina could not believe that such an exemption even existed, even after I had the amazing Mr. John Cantrell send her an application in 2017. I stayed on her. I saw her every moment. Every time I saw her, I couldn't even say hello. I wanted to say, did you complete your exemption application? Because we all know it takes money, resources, to run such amazing facilities to help the community. Even at one of her fundraisers, she had not completed the application. This was 2 years after we had provided the application to her. So it took us to be in a line to get our shot for COVID for me to say to her, Trina, have you done the application? That day, she just said, Miss Vivian, we're going to get it done. And she did. They got it done. And now they are exempt. And that is a wonderful thing, because when you think about these type of facilities that provide the type of services to people who needs a transformation in life, it's critical that every dollar counts. So that's another example. Another example, what about fraternity houses and sorority houses? Well, what about them? Yes, they too can be exempted as long as they meet the certain criteria established by the state of Tennessee comptrollers of the Treasury. This picture right here is the picture of the Omega Psi Phi fraternity house, Gamma Phi chapter here in Nashville, Tennessee. I discovered that they were not benefiting from the exemption program. In 2017, went right over to Mr. Cantrell and said, send them an application. We shared the information with them. I shared the information with them and said, you could be exempted. You're a fraternity house. How is that? You can. And so sharing that information with them, we sent them an application, and that too took a while to encourage them to complete it. Just get started. It's not difficult. Now, there are some things you're going to have to provide to the state of Tennessee because that's just a process. But nonetheless, they did start the application that we sent them in 2017, and within that same year, after they did everything and provided the state all the information they needed, they too became exempted. In 2021, they were approved for exemption. And then sorority houses. Well, the Nashville Alumni Chapter Minerva Foundation of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated bought a property, I think it was in around about 2007, possibly. Provided them an application in 2017. They didn't know that they could be exempt. They too took a little longer time in order to understand that this is a process that is a benefit to someone who meets the criteria of the state of Tennessee. I'm pleased to say that in 2021, also same year, maybe it was 2020. I think it was 2020, you think, John, that they were exempted after completing all. You think it was just last year? Wow, just last year. And I at one time calculated the amount of taxes paid from the time that they bought, and it was a little over $20,000. So this is a benefit that you want to have your organization to be well aware of if you're starting a church, starting a not-for-profit, or if you already have one, you want to just make sure you have all your bases covered, just in case there's some properties that you may have that could be exempted. And I think Mrs. Emily Bennett will be speaking about those type of options that are available to you. So these are just a few of the critical examples why this workshop is being presented. We value Nashville, Davidson County, and we value you. I hope you found these examples invaluable and relatable. While they learn in time the impact of the exemption or the lack thereof, working with our office, people found out that this is a great place to start in order to be able to get that benefit needed. Now, we can't always guide you to reverse an unexpected tax bill, which is why we work closely with our governing bodies, the Comptroller's Office, the State Board of Equalization, to ensure that we provide the proper assistance. At the end of the day, the State Board of Equalization is the ultimate decision maker for exemption application requests. Now, let's turn our attention to the decision makers. There they are. There is Mr. Robin Pope and Mrs. Emily Bennett. Robin Pope, who is unable to be with us, Attorney Robin Pope, as I must be clear on that. He's unable to join us today, and he is the Executive Secretary of the Tennessee State Board of Equalization. In his role as the Executive Secretary, Robin is responsible for hearing statewide property tax appeals, reviewing tax exemptions, and providing research and support to the Tennessee General Assembly. Since joining the Comptroller's Office in 2017, he has served as the tax counsel with the State Board, reviewing applications for property tax exemption for Tennessee religious, charitable, scientific, and nonprofit educational institutions. In addition to his role as tax counsel, Robin serves as the project manager for special initiatives of the State Board. In January 2020, Robin was named Deputy Executive Secretary to the State Board of Equalization before being named the Executive Secretary in July 2020. Emily Bennett, who we love, and she is here with us today, is the Senior Tax Counsel within the State Board of Equalization. Emily reviews and determines whether Tennessee's religious, charitable, scientific, and nonprofit educational institutions qualify for a property tax exemption. I want to repeat that. Emily reviews and determines whether Tennessee's religious, charitable, scientific, and nonprofit educational institutions qualify for property tax exemption. She also serves as board counsel to the Assessment Appeals Commission, assists with drafting proposed legislation and rules, and advises the assessors, like myself, regarding current property tax exemption law. Emily has nearly 20 years of experience within the Tennessee Comptroller's Office. She first joined the office after receiving her law degree from the University of Tennessee's College of Law in Knoxville, Tennessee. She has also worked in the private sector as a trust administrator for independent trust company. Emily is a 2014 graduate of Lead, Tennessee, and received her Master's of Business Administration from the Tennessee Technology University in 2018. In her spare time, Emily enjoys visiting with her nieces, and she is her nieces and nephews, that's right, and she's an avid reader. Welcome, Emily Bennett. I'm just going to take this with me.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for being here. And thank you, Assessor Will Hoyt, for organizing this today. I'm going to jump right in here and go over just some kind of basic information about property tax exemptions. Kind of the first question is, why is any property exempt? And that is in Article 2, Section 28 of the Tennessee State Constitution. It states that all property is subject to taxation, but it did grant the Tennessee General Assembly the authority to make exception for some things, including government-owned property, religious, charitable, scientific, literary, or nonprofit educational institutions. And the General Assembly did do that, and that general exemption statute is up there is 675212, and that's kind of the focus of today's workshop. There are some other specific exemptions that I'm not really going to get into today. So who decides whether or not property is exempt? The assessor of property does make decisions when it comes to government-owned property, housing authority property, and then with cemeteries, if there's no charge for burial plots, then that would be a decision for the assessor to make. The State Board of Equalization decides exemption for religious, charitable, scientific, or nonprofit educational institutions. So those exemptions that would fall under that general exemption statute. That statute does require application be made to our office. So again, the focus of this workshop is those general exemptions. And there's some examples up there of the types of entities that sometimes fall under those categories. So obviously churches with religious, charitable, you've got entities like the United Way. Sometimes you might not think about this, though, a volunteer fire department, Goodwill. I could probably go on and on, but scientific, we don't get too many of those. Nonprofit educational institutions, charter schools, universities, Vanderbilt, Belmont, a lot of that in Davidson County. Exemptions are not automatic, and they do require application. So kind of what I just said there, have to apply to get the exemption. If property is owned by an individual, or if it's owned by a for-profit entity, it's generally not going to qualify for exemption. One of the requirements under 675212 is that the property has to be owned by a religious, charitable, scientific, or nonprofit educational institution. If your property is vacant and unused, generally not going to qualify for exemption. I'll show you a photograph a little bit further on. Get this question a lot, and especially when the personal property Schedule Bs go out. But hey, I'm a 501c3. I don't have to file. Not true. 501c3 status is not a guarantee of a property tax exemption in Tennessee. You still have to meet the requirements in the Tennessee statute. So vice versa, you don't have to have a 501c3 to qualify for exemption in Tennessee. Okay. Kind of what you were talking about. Church gets an exemption. Maybe they buy an adjacent parcel. It's going to be a parking lot, or it's going to be a recreational area or something like that. That parcel requires a separate application. The exemption that the church receives on that main parcel or the first parcel they apply on. It's not a blanket exemption for all properties that are then purchased by the church or any other entity. How to apply. I think we are going to show a video. We do have an online filing system now, and our office, our goal is to be paperless. However, Assessor Will Hoyt, her staff, really, they go out of their way to help people get this information together. And so we do still accept paper applications, and they will assist with, getting the documents ready if you do not want to use the online filing system. But if you do, you can file for more than one parcel at a time. You will have the ability to upload all supporting documents, which I'm going to cover here in just a minute. You will pay the appropriate application fee at the end before you can submit. And do keep in mind that any records that are submitted with your application, they do become public record. So, what documents do you need to include? We're going to need to see the warranty or quitclaim deed so that we can verify ownership of the property. Corporate charter and bylaws. We get this question a lot. What if we're not incorporated? We get little churches. Any document, a constitution, any document that explains the organization's governing structure or how business decisions are made, that will be sufficient. Financial documents. 990s for your larger organizations, a budget or income and expense statement will be sufficient for most applicants. It doesn't have to be, we get questions again, smaller entities, doesn't have to be anything formal. I'm pretty sure I've had something that's come in just written down on notebook paper, and we're just looking for income and expenditures. And the reason that we need that information is that's what helps me determine whether or not the entity is the type of entity that qualifies for exemption. So if I have an application from a church, there are certain things I would expect to see on a church's income and expense statement. So I would expect to see tithing and funds expended for missions and things like that. So that is why we request that information. For real property, we do need a photograph. I would say that's not as important as it used to be with all the online mapping tools and things like that, but at least just a photograph of the building, if there's a building. If it's a vacant land, maybe not as useful in that scenario. If the application is for personal property only, a lot of those items you would not be required to submit. There's not going to be a deed. We don't need a photograph of the personal property, but we would need a listing of those items. So what do we do when we review the application? I'm going to verify ownership. Like I said, that is done through the deed. I'm going to look at the real property and what structures are on there, how many structures are on there, what type of organization is it that is applying. I'm going to look at the documents to confirm that. How is the property being used, and is the entirety of the property being used for exempt purposes, or is some of it maybe not going to qualify for exemption because it's leased to a non-qualifying entity, or it's vacant and unused, or some factors like that. So after I review it, I'm going to either approve it, deny it, or I may say, I don't have enough information to make this decision right now. And I would, in that situation, just send a letter requesting either additional documents or that I would have questions that I just need responses to. Also, with Davidson County, I request an assessor review on every single application that I receive, and they physically go and look at every single property and send back a report to me. And this helps me verify what was on the application, that is correct, and that is what their eyeballs see, because I don't have my eyes on the property. So I depend heavily on their office to assist me with that. So verification of use with structures. Also acreage, we get applications, sometimes maybe it's a building in 25 acres. I'm going to need to know how is all this acreage being used. And so usually I would ask if it's over 5 acres, I'm going to ask some questions about the acreage. We would prorate. So if there's areas of the property that don't qualify for exemption for whatever reason, the exemption would be prorated. And the part that does not qualify would not be approved for exemption. Again, the assessor's input in this is very, very helpful. This is your favorite picture. And this is actually a picture I received with an application. So property that's vacant, that there's no structures on, it doesn't mean that it cannot be exempt, but we would need evidence of active use. And this is what came from a church that they sent in, the youth group out there studying or having recreation or whatever they're doing. So just, he's got a piece of wheat or something in his mouth. He's enjoying that property. But just keep in mind, vacant doesn't necessarily mean unused. So if I see that it's vacant, I'm going to try to find out, is there any use of it? I'm not going to just jump to the conclusion that it's a vacant lot, so it can't be approved. Okay, so if you get an approval, what will that contain? It's going to, the parcel, we're going to specify what parcel it is that's being approved for exemption. There will be an effective date. We'll send a copy to the applicant, the county assessor, and the trustee's office. Does it exempt all property owned by the applicant? No, it only exempts the parcel that the organization has applied for exemption on. Again, a partial exemption could be based on use, and it'll be proportional to what's qualifying and non-qualifying. Based on the assessor review and information from the applicant on how much or how often or what's being used for what. An approval does not transfer, it does not expire, but it can be revoked. So in terms of it not transferring, if that property church sells to another church, the purchaser does not get the benefit of that exemption. They have to submit their own application for property tax exemption. Once the exemption is approved, it does not expire. However, it can be revoked. And I'll talk about that more in just a minute. Effective dates, this can be confusing, but it's very important because the effective date is essentially the date the property becomes non-taxable. So if taxes accrued prior to that date, then those are still going to be the responsibility of the organization. Generally, if you file your application before May 20th, your effective date is going to be January 1 of that current year, or if the property was acquired after January 1 and before May 20th and you apply within 30 days, it would be the date title transferred, or if you apply within 30 days of the date use began. And I know that's all kind of confusing, but it's whichever of those dates is later. So after January 1, we can go back before May 20th, we can go back as far as January 1, but then it could depend on some other factors, like whether you owned it January 1 or whether it was actually being used on January 1. If the application is received after May 20th, it's generally the application receipt date. We will use the postmark date if the application was sent in via U.S. mail, or it's going to be the date use began if the application was filed within 30 days of that use beginning. Again, it's whichever is later. There's a special throwback rule for religious to religious transfers. If a church buys property to replace its own exempt property, or if a church buys property that had previously been approved for a religious use exemption, then that effective date can go back up to 3 years from the date of application. And I think I already went over that. It matters because that's the date that the property is not taxable anymore. So this is confusing, and I've added some language into my approval letter so that people understand you might need to contact the trustee's office because there might be taxes that accrued prior to the effective date of that exemption. Does the applicant have to pay taxes while waiting on a decision? I always say contact the trustee's office, first of all, to find out, how they handle that in terms of if they want to accept a partial payment. But you have a couple of options, and you can pay under protest, which you would note that on your payment. And if you do pay under protest and it's approved, you could receive a refund, plus I believe it's regular interest. If you choose to wait on the initial determination and it's approved, then, if you haven't paid the taxes, then you wouldn't have to pay anything. But if it's denied, then you would have to pay the taxes plus any applicable regular interest. There is no penalty interest that accrues during that time period. Leases, we recently changed the law on this. So it used to be that I think you could lease to another qualifying exempt entity, but the amount of rent could not exceed the reasonable share of cost of use. And we found that that was extremely burdensome for our office to try to determine whether those amounts matched or not. And so we amended the statute. And you can now, if you are a qualifying exempt entity, you can lease to another qualifying exempt entity, and it does not matter what the amount of rent is that exchanges hands. So the owner has to be a qualifying entity, the lessee has to be a qualifying entity, and the lessee also has to use the property in furtherance of exempt purposes. Get this question a lot. If you're an individual and you own property and you lease it to an eligible exempt entity, no, you cannot get a property tax exemption because the property is not owned by a qualifying exempt institution. If the lessee, if you're an individual and you are leasing property to a qualifying exempt entity, that qualifying exempt entity may apply for exemption of their personal property only that is located at that parcel. Construction. This changed recently as well. So for property under construction, it's really what is approved for exemption is going to depend on how long it takes to complete construction. And the important date is really what can be approved from the date of commencement. And there is no definition of commencement of construction, so that's kind of just a fact-based determination that our office has to make. If construction is completed within 12 months of the date of commencement, then both the land and the improvement under construction can be approved. If it takes longer than 12 months from that date of commencement, then the land will remain taxable during that period of construction. My recommendation would be to apply when you begin construction. And if you have a question about, is this the right time? We've started doing this. You can always reach out to me or my staff, and we can advise you on, you should go ahead and apply. But typically what we do is place those applications on hold. So once you've commenced and we know it's under construction, then I would notify you, we're going to put this on hold. And usually I will hold it for 12 months. Sometimes an entity will reach out and say, we're not finished yet. I'll still continue to hold it, but it's just going to be important in terms of, is the land exempt or not exempt?
We're going to have a Q&A session. If you could hold your questions, and if you would write your questions down, and that way she can get through the presentation. But definitely, as she gets to certain points that are very, very important to you, please make a note of it, put a pin in it, write your question down, because she has an amazing memory and can just spew it right out with the answer that you need to have.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The land limit, I will be honest, we don't use this very often. It does limit an organization to 100 acres within a county. However, this would be 100 acres of unimproved land, so land that is not necessary to support exempt structures. So I always think of these large religious retreats and things like that, back in the day there was no limit, and so they had hundreds of acres. So, I mean, you can only have so many hiking trails and things like that are going to be approved for exemption now. And that's really the only time I've seen this restriction be applied. Final tips and thoughts, you have to submit an application for each parcel. Again, if you're doing it online, you can add each parcel onto your filing separate. I mean, it'll be part of one filing, but you would add each parcel for which you're seeking exemption. If you're applying for exemption of real property, you do not have to apply for exemption of the personal property separately. So if we approve the real property, the personal property is going to be included with that exemption to the same extent that the real property is approved. Again, I think I talked about this a minute ago. You can apply for personal property only. So if you're in a lease space, you're leasing space, you can still apply for exemption of your personal property. I'm not really sure the proration. We get this question from assessors. So effective date is in the middle of the year sometime. They can prorate that assessment based on the effective date of the exemption. We do have an online filing system, and I think we're going to show a video that is on our website that kind of goes through step by step about how you do complete a filing on there. But this is how you get to that online filing system. And we also, if you want to look up the status of your application, this is the link to the public portal. We have a public portal. It has two tabs, so you would click the exemption search tab, and in the case number field, you would enter, you're going to have an ER number if you apply. You would put that ER number in the case number field, and then you would be able to see the status of the application. Revocations. So grounds for revocation would be fraud, misrepresentation, or erroneous information. Don't use that one too much. The next two, more likely, we see this pretty often. Change in use to where the property no longer meets the requirements for exemption, or the property has been abandoned. It's no longer used for an exempt purpose. Usually the exemption process, it can be initiated by anyone, really. I get information from assessors, taxpayer may call, or entity itself may call and say, hey, we're not using this property for this purpose anymore. So really anybody can initiate that process. The State Board of Equalization does make the decision of whether the property exemption, whether there's probable cause to revoke the exemption. If we do revoke the exemption, you would receive a determination letter very similar to what you would receive for an approval or a denial, and that decision can be appealed just like an initial determination. There's a 90-day appeal window where you would then have a hearing if you dispute that revocation. And this is just kind of to show you, we're not always dealing little churches, big churches. We see it all. And I think our time frame for processing exemptions, I think Robin said it was somewhere in the neighborhood 3 months, 4 months average, but pretty good. And we do the best we can, but we do get a lot of applications. That's it. That's all I have.
We're at that point. We're at the.
Do you want to show it, and then if there's questions about it, we can just.
Let's do that. Okay. We're going to go ahead and show completing the application itself, so you can get that in, and then we'll go straight to the Q&A. Everybody, give her a round of applause. Absolutely, absolutely. So we're going to go ahead and show the video now.
Hello and welcome to the State Board of Equalization's Property Tax Exemption Application Instructional Video. The goal of today's video is to demonstrate how to access and properly file property tax exemption.
I'm going to just kind of talk about it as it plays. He just is here navigating to the system. I just didn't want you to have to listen to that. So you're going to click up there, right there on the exemption picture. And then where the church is, you would click the file an exemption application, and you can see the links to the public portal I mentioned a minute ago. And you would also go there to file your appeal. And then this is some general information we do have on our website. I kind of call that the FAQ portion there, where we go over a lot of the things I just talked about. So required documents and construction, leases, effective dates, all of the stuff I sort of just covered. I don't think we talked about appealing an initial determination, but you have 90 days from the date that that's issued, and you would go online to do that. You just put in the case number. It's pretty simple process. And then there's another level of appeal that beyond that first level. The exemption manual out there on our website is also a great resource that has a lot of the general information. It also does cover, I talked about there's some specific exemptions that I wasn't going to talk about today, but in that manual, those are all covered as well. That is the fee structure right there, and it is based on the aggregate value of the parcels in the application. So if you're filing for multiple parcels at one time, it is not a separate fee for each parcel. It will just be based on the value of all of those parcels together, and the max amount that you would have to pay is $120. You would set up an account before. If you don't have an account, you would set up an account and you will log in. Once you do that, you would have access to all, your prior filings, or you can create one, start one. You don't have to finish it all in the same day. You can create it, start it, come back to it later. You go, I don't have all this information. You couldn't log in.
Here he's showing how to do a new account.
Okay. I'm happy to play the volume, but I know it's a little. It's going. I know it's just slow. You can, yeah.
Let me turn the volume.
Yeah.
Log in. To begin, the first portion of the application, we ask you for some basic information about the property or properties which you're applying, including the county in which the property is located, some more detailed information about the property, either in the form of the owner's name, last name, first name with no commas, the parcel ID, or the property address. If you've got the parcel ID or copy of your property's deed or a recent tax bill, this is often the easiest way to find the property, and you should use that first. If you don't have the parcel ID, you can search for the property with the street address information or the owner's name. For demonstration purposes, let's say that I'm searching for a property which is located in Davidson County, which is owned by the state of Tennessee. I'll click Find Parcel to start the search. The search is started when you see a blue toolbar in the middle of the screen. Once the bar disappears, you'll see the search results displayed below. You should look through the results and find the property or properties which you're wanting to apply for. Let's say that I'm wishing to apply for the property, which is located at 400 Diedrich Street. I can click the property, see that it's highlighted, and add selected parcel to transfer that information to the application. Again, you can always apply for multiple properties in the same application by repeating those search steps, finding the property, clicking to select, add selected parcel to transfer that information. Once you're satisfied, please click Next to advance to the next portion of the application. Throughout the process, you'll see a green box in the top right-hand corner indicating that your filing has been saved. You can always complete a portion of the application before returning and finalizing your application. Here, you'll see more detailed information about the property or properties which you've selected, starting with the parcel information and also the owner information. You should take time to read and carefully ensure that this information is accurate, and that if you've accidentally included any properties which you no longer wish to apply for, either select delete.
So we just kind of wanted to give you an idea of what the online filing system looks like. So once he gets to these screens, you're going to go through about 3 screens. You're going to put in contact information. The next screen is going to ask some questions about how the property is being used, when did you start, things like that. So basically, you're just going to navigate through those screens until you get to the payment page. But one thing I did want to mention is he started off with using the search tool, and this sometimes can be, it can be difficult to find your parcel if the owner name, there's sometimes things that don't match because the data is not real-time data. So I did want to make people aware that there is a tab at the top of that says manual add, and you do not have to use the search tool. So if you have your tax bill in front of you and you've got the parcel ID and all of that information, you can click that manual add tab and put all that information in. But these are kind of the questions, and then go through and submit, and you will have the opportunity to upload all the supporting documents that list what those are. If we don't get something we need, we'll ask for it. So really, deed and payment's the most important thing, but I think that pretty much covers the online filing system.
So that gives you just a general overview in reference to doing the application process. And so that is also, of course, is a critical and key part of providing your application to the State Board of Equalization. So we're going to pivot here. We've had the pleasure of, not first, but after we have someone who's just arrived, and we're so glad to have him here to kind of share with us as a testimony. I think I've mentioned earlier with you about an example of getting an exemption after you had an exemption and something has occurred. And then after that, we're going to pivot into our question and answering session. We want you to ask any question you may have. If you have an application right now, we want you to ask a question. I'm sure that Robin cannot, of course, give you an answer, but give you some idea of what was being needed when the question was asked of you or when the letter was sent to you to provide the additional information. So as I stated, we have a special guest. We were hoping that he would be able to join us. So glad that he has. Got a little difference going on here. It's called a beard, okay? Yes, as I stated before, Reverend Representative Harold Moses Love Jr., representative of House District 58. He is, most importantly, the pastor of Lee Chapel AME Church. And as I stated before, they found themselves in a very precarious situation because they too had received a tax bill. Welcome, Reverend Representative Harold Moses Love Jr., pastor of AME Church, to share with us about his experience. Will you welcome him? And y'all can do better than that. Come on.
Thank you, Assessor Will Hoyt, and to all those who are joining us today. Our church had been in the community for a number of decades, and we embarked upon building a new facility. And the original church faced Scoville Street, and our new facility was going to face D.B. Todd, which was the street just on the corner. No one thought that we would have to reapply for exemption because we had not technically moved our sanctuary. We had not moved our membership, and we were still in the same location. However, to Assessor Will Hoyt's point, we then, once I got assigned there after the church was built, got the notice that we indeed did owe some large amount of property taxes, and it was also including the parking lot behind the former church that we never had thought to have exempted. And so we had two situations going on, because now the new church facility included the old parking lot facility, and we never thought to have it exempted. But thanks to the wonderful staff of Assessor Will Hoyt, who helped us navigate through the process, we were able to apply for the proper exemption for the new property. This was very helpful to me because I had a colleague of mine who was the pastor of Bethel AME Church on South Street, who had a piece of property across from the church that they used from time to time for overflow parking, but never again had thought to have the property exempted. I reached out to him. I said, listen, you need to give Assessor Will Hoyt a call, because now that the neighborhood around your church is experiencing much growth, you may find that the small amount of property tax that you've been paying on that piece of property that was not anything significant may find a higher value now that there are new homes being built around you. And indeed, that was the case. They found that their small amount of value for that property then increased in such a manner that their property tax bill for that piece of property was somewhere in the range of $25,000 or $30,000. And so this is another situation where we found a common practice where persons just were not thinking that they could exempt a piece of property. They were using it for the purpose in which they had established their facility. They were using it to be related to parking or having events, whether it was Easter egg hunts or other activities on the property, but never thought to take that extra step to get exempt. So let me again tip my hat off to the staff of Assessor Will Hoyt to help us navigate that process also, because they could have very simply said, well, I'm sorry, write the check. But instead, they said, let us help you figure out how you can best navigate this. And for that, I'm eternally grateful for your assistance, because not only Lee Chapel, but also, again, Bethel AME Church on South Street was able to benefit. And then I found myself asking other colleagues, do you have a piece of property that your faith institution uses in any manner related to the main house of worship, whether it's overflow parking, maybe it's for your Bible study, maybe it's for a Saturday academy? Do you have a piece of property that you are using for that and have never thought about getting it exempted? And oftentimes the response would be, we never thought about it because the value was so low that we just went ahead and wrote the check, didn't mean much. But then what we found was oftentimes in those neighborhoods, again, as growth began to increase in the neighborhood, the value of property in the neighborhood began to grow, and then conversely, that property value increased. And the real thing is this: most of our institutions don't just have an extra $30,000, $20,000, $45,000, $15,000 just laying around that they can just write the check for without feeling some impact. More than that, we can always find something more to use that $30,000 or $20,000 or $15,000 for, whether it's a summer camp, whether it's a feeding program, maybe it's an issue we're dealing with homelessness or whatever. And so for me, it's always about what could that have been used for to help us continue the mission of our faith institutions. So again, we had so many conversations about this, and Assessor Will Hoyt and I kept saying, we got to get together to open up avenues for more persons who would be in a similar situation, that they would need to take that extra step, fill out the paperwork, have a conversation with the wonderful staff in Assessor Will Hoyt's office, and figure out how you can navigate the process. And even got to the point where one other institution over there by Pearl Cone called me in and had me listen to all the property that they had. And my simple response was, I can't help you. But Vivian Will Hoyt's office can. I said, you all give her a call. I said, I can't do anything extraordinary from the State House, but I know that Assessor Will Hoyt's people can help you out. And they called you. I believe they called, and AJ Starling called, and they called and worked. But it's a situation where, again, these things happen because somebody in the organization oftentimes is taking care of that. And they just don't think that the next step should be to get exempt. So, again, thank you so much for what you've done and what you continue to do. And this is a wonderful workshop that I'm glad is being recorded and broadcast now, because now folks will have a chance to rewatch this and just ask a simple question. Is it possible, perhaps, we can have our property exempted also and have full use of it and save that money? So thank you. I don't think there are any questions. All right. Thank you all so much.
Well, first, thank you so much for the comments. If you would, Representative Love, would you join in with the Q&A session that Brother John Cantro is going to moderate, of course, with also Mrs. Bennett being here as well. So if there's some questions asked of the audience, what you went through and what have you, then we're going to have them be able to answer some of those questions, whatever questions you may have. Does that go okay with you?
I'll stay as long as the cookies last.
All right. We won't be passing the plate today, okay? All right. The cookie plate. All right. Come on forward. Come on, Robin. And
Is it?
you want to just kind of have them up here? You may want to have them up here, you think?
Does that work? That'd be great. That would be wonderful. Otherwise, we're looking like a bluegrass band at the Ryman, all surrounded one microphone. I've got some questions that I'd like to ask, but I do want to give anyone here in the House the opportunity to ask whatever questions you may have, because I have a feeling you've come with some things on your mind, and I'd be happy for you to ask. Yes. Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
My question is, when you refer to the value that's on the application,
And if you do one thing, could you identify yourself with organization you are with so that, you can hear who are you with and it helps us better assess our next workshop?
sure. My name is LaTonja Lewis. I'm representing Hopewell Missionary Baptist Church in Palmetto.
Thank you for being here.
When it, on the application, it is value. Is that the value that is listed on the assessor's bill? The bill that sent us not the appraised value that is the bill, just what is on the tax bill itself? Is that what you're referring to?
Yes. If you most likely at this point want to use our value. I think Emily's main concern there is just how much the fee is.
Yeah.
So if we have a lower value than you actually are and you get a better fee cut, you'll definitely want to go with our value.
Yes, sir.
Pretty much for a lot of my work on something. The first question is on construction and renovation. I think what I understood is determination is held back until this process is carried out. Can you talk a little bit about how the throwback works in relation to that?
In terms of, so if you have filed your application and we put it on hold for construction? Yeah, his question, I believe, is about the effective date for when you file an application and the property is under construction. And so I know I talked about that if it's completed within 12 months, then that exemption can include both the land and the improvement. Now, we do have to look at the land. If there's excess acreage, maybe it's not going to be everything, but the effective date would be determined based on the application receipt date, or depending on, sometimes people will file and construction hasn't actually commenced yet. And so that commencement date is very important because that's the date that we deem use has begun. So the effective date might be the commencement date, or it might be the application receipt date. And then in terms of, is it going to include both the land and the improvement? It depends on that construction period.
And how does it throw back work?
So the throwback is only applicable for a religious to religious transfer. Are you asking how that plays into?
If the organization goes through a construction phase, they're otherwise eligible for throwback. Is that still taken into consideration?
Yes. Yes, so let's say you commenced construction a year ago, but you didn't think to apply. But again, just keep in mind that when that period exceeds 12 months, it's not going to cover the land, so it might not really be that helpful because of the improvement, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's not going to be put on the roll until it's substantially complete. That's correct,
There
right?
could be a prorate value or a material value, a January 1st material value. And at some point during the year up until September, we could put a prorate value. If it's completed, we'll put the full value on at that point.
And I think that's what happened with us. We were not in receipt of the larger amount until after we had finally completed our project. While we were building, we didn't get billed for that new amount, even though the plans were out there. But it wasn't until we finally completed everything that we got that large, which is what catches you because you don't see it while you're building. But it's not until you finish it that you see that change.
The next question isn't more about semantics and how we get those. I'm a little confused with the terminology of initial determination. Is that final or is there additional determination without any additional appeal? In other words, is that final or is that something that is additional?
Okay, so the question is about initial determinations and whether that is final without an additional step. The initial determination will become final after 90 days if there is no appeal.
And my last question is, if there is an appeal for initial determination, who within the state board of equalization or who makes that next level?
The question is, when you do appeal the initial determination, where does that go and who makes that decision? So let me just explain a little bit about that process because it has recently changed. So when we get an appeal now, the first step will be what's called a status and scheduling conference. And those are conducted by the executive secretary. And that's not a substantive hearing. That is just a conference where both parties come on and a decision is made of, is this case ready to docket for a hearing? So once there is a hearing scheduled, then the record is forwarded over to the Administrative Procedures Division of the Secretary of State's office, and one of their administrative law judges will conduct a hearing.
Other questions? Yes, sir.
Before I ask a question, I'm going to make a statement. I've had to go through the process twice. I'm the director of finance for the Temple Congregational High by Shalom. We are one of those people that has been up here since the 1840s that decided, wasn't no exempt stuff. And then the half of the church campus somehow had never been exempt as well. So I've been through the process with these folks twice. And I'm sorry to have to say, when people would ask me, to stay in surprise, these are some of the nicest Anyway, another organization,
Thank you.
which is 501c3, we do rent to a non-exempt entity. We pay a very healthy portion of the property tax. So it's been, I don't know how many years, this started way before I got there. If I want to go in and look at that ratio and just make sure it's correct, where would I find that particular information? The non-exempt sits on the top, the building sits on the bottom for which we rent, and there is a proration, so we pay.
Would that be, we have that, he can't hear what you're saying, Randy Moore, he was our chief deputy of operations. The questions in reference to the fraction of the exemption of an entire, the entire entity.
Yes.
Will we have that on our website to be able for him to see what portion of it that is exempted and what is not, as far as value? You're looking at value.
It should be, typically when
I know our website shows value, but the portion of value, that's.
when they determine that it's going to be based on a percentage, more than likely, unless there are separate buildings. If there were just separate floors within a building, then it's probably going to be based on a percentage basis.
But he wants to go in and be able to see it.
Yeah, well, they don't,
I don't
it's
think
not
they
like
have
there's an elevator. There's like an entrance to one, there's an entrance to the other, but one is the first floor, one is the second floor.
So So a lot of times with the state board, Emily will render a determination of if we looked at space. So we could talk about a VFW type scenario where you would have everything exempt except a bar area. So we would go in and say, what is the bar area? And we would determine, okay, it is so many square feet. We would then turn this into Emily and say, out of a total square footage, of course, there's a bar area of this amount of square footage. So then she comes back with, if she takes that into account and whatever else she takes into account, I'm not saying I have anything to do with it, but she will take what they are using for an exemptable purpose and render that portion exempt, and what they are not using for an exempt purpose, render that not exemptable. So we will then take that percentage and put it in. The problem with that is we're doing that on a card that addresses land and building status, and she might come back with 15% of the building is taxable. You can do the math on the appraisal part of that, and it's not going to be 15%. So that's not trying to get in the weeds, but there's no way from looking at a value you would understand a percentage typically.
Floor plan, is that what you're
I think
saying?
Yeah, just to see how the property was laid out and how the splits are being made, and if it's still equitable.
Well, first thing, I know it's not on our
I got
website.
you.
That's why I wanted to, if you want to know where can you go to find it. It's not on our website. We can provide that to you, no doubt about that, but it's not on our website, but we can definitely provide it to you because that's what we have to base our assessment on, what is exempted and what is not exempted. You want to ask?
No, I was just going to say that usually we do specify in the initial determination, but I think we chatted earlier and it might be a really old one that, that probably we're not going to be able to find. So might have to sort of back end into it based off the information the assessor has.
There you go.
Let me ask you, are you renting that property below market value?
Oh, no.
No.
In the last 2 years, it hadn't gone up since first. It's not, it's going to hit market value when the lease is done. So, yeah, it's not a problem.
Okay.
Speaking of lease,
I also want to say thank you for the treatment of our amazing staff.
Very
We
well,
appreciate you.
and I really appreciate the way that I was treated and the help that I got. It made life a lot easier.
speaking of lease, does it matter if a religious leases to, when you say exemptable, if I have a religious leasing to a charitable or a religious leasing to an educational, does that matter?
No, as long as the lessee, it would be a qualifying entity in and of itself. So it can be any of those types of entities. It just would have to be an entity that also would qualify for exemption.
Okay. Speak to religious housing, because I know that comes up a lot in as far as when we get questions.
I would say those are very fact specific. And so generally, parsonages are the only types of religious housing, but there are exceptions. And so I just would encourage someone, if they think they have a piece of property that might qualify. I mean, the worst thing that can happen is you lose, the application processing fee to find out, to get an answer from our office. So a max of the $120 that your organization would be out for us to look at that information and make that determination.
And are you asking of religious organizations renting housing out for people? Or?
Well, we do get that. We get missionary housing, comes up sometimes. We have a house that we let missionaries stay in when they're back on furlough doing fundraising.
And we do have a pretty definitive answer on that, because that decision, I believe, came down from, not sure if it was the Court of Appeals or the Supreme Court, but housing that is for missionaries on furlough does not qualify for exemption.
Okay. So a church that says we want to lease to just for under market rent to veterans.
I would say there.
is under market rent when you say that, before you answer?
Well,
I defer
can't
to my attorney.
I can't really answer hypotheticals like that. I just would have to actually see the documents and the
documents.
scenario and the lease, and I don't, I wouldn't feel
What
comfortable.
documents would you like to see so that we know what to give you?
A lease. I mean, everything that's required,
Sure.
plus a lease, and, any additional information they want to provide that describes that arrangement.
Sure.
And I actually have a bill that, if everything goes well, says that if nonprofit organizations rent below market to anybody, the local government has the option to provide them with a grant that is going to be equal to, but not more than, what that organization paid in property taxes. So we had to walk around it very carefully to not say that you're reimbursing property taxes, but you are able to offer a grant. And we did this because we had so many instances where nonprofit organizations were renting below market rate to people to try to give them an opportunity to, start their life over, or to be coming back on furlough, or veterans. But they were having to pay the same amount of property taxes as if they were renting at market rate. And so this is not a perfect solution, but it's one I think will give. And I think the Comptroller's Office is included in the language to say that you all will help approve the grant program, to say that, if you want to, you have the option to. And that really means that a local government could give 10%, 20%, 50%, or 100% of that amount that has been paid. But this also came out of conversation with Assessor Wilhoit to try to figure out how we could help organizations who were using property for what could be under the umbrella of their work, but still was viewed as a business enterprise, and trying to find some relief for them, because we know that if you keep on paying property taxes and you're renting below market rate, at some point you may have the conversation with the organization and say, this is not financially feasible for us to do this, and that's going to reduce our affordable housing stock. And so if all goes well the next couple of weeks, we may see some legislation passed that will give us an opportunity to say to county governments, you have the option. The state is now saying to you, you have the option to offer a grant to a nonprofit after you've paid your property taxes and after you've justified that it's below market rate, the rent that you're receiving, to get some of those funds back.
Thank you so much. That sounds like a wonderful, wonderful thing. Thank you for the time you put into that. Yes, please.
I'm Shelley Dillon. I'm with Habitat for Humanity here in Greater Nashville. And my question that I have pertains to, we're constantly looking for land, because we have to have our land out there, for a runway for several years to be able to have the development done, and then be able to actually start the bids and put converting individuals in those homes. At what point can we apply to get that property tax exempt?
Yeah. So there is a specific statute that applies to Habitat for Humanity, and unfortunately it does have a time period beyond which exemption cannot extend. So, I think generally there's nothing in there that says when you have to apply. It just says that you can't be exempt. Like if it's a single lot and the intent is to build one single family home, it cannot be exempt for longer than 12 months. And then if it's a planned neighborhood, then that's going to be based off the first lot is 12 months and each additional lot, I think it's 6 months right now, although I did see some legislation was filed on that this year, and I'm not sure where it's at or if it's going to pass. But so with a neighborhood, then it would depend on how many lots there are, what that period of exemption is. So I would say most of the time Habitat applies kind of at the beginning of that acquisition period, but I don't know, there's nothing that says you have to.
Registered with Metro, at that point, would that be?
Yep. Yes. Yep. And if you do have a plat, it's great if you go ahead and submit that information along with the supporting documents that we request. That helps with us determining that period of exemption.
We have so much time between when we buy it and get it platted, that period of time, really, there's nothing that we can do.
If you could apply, you could apply and then maybe we could hold it. I don't know that I've ever been presented with that question before. How long does it usually take to get a plat?
And it just, when we can buy property, we don't want to hold off because it gets, bought by somebody else.
Yeah.
So we're trying to have availability
Yeah.
to move from location to location with our build seasons.
Yeah.
So I thought that there was a 12-month type rule, and that's why some of the property we just own, and since it's not platted yet, I haven't applied.
Well, that question in reference to the timing of platting, that would probably come as an answer from the planning department, the mapping department, because that is our mapping entity for the assessor's office. Every assessor's office has a mapping department, other than maybe one other, but we don't have the mapping department, it's an entity of the planning department. Brandy, how long do you think when there's ever been a platting process, what is the length of time does it take mapping of the planning department to maybe get a plat completed?
I'm not sure over there right now. I mean, it could take months, it could take,
All because of COVID, they're still working from home, maybe.
and just the fact that they're just so overwhelmed right now.
And sometimes it takes time on our end to know what are we going to do
Yeah.
to do that plan.
And that's what I was about to say is I think the thing for me is I would have to know how many lots are going to be in there. And you probably don't know that until you sort of start that plat process.
We kind of envision what it's going to contain. That would be my trigger point of when I do the application.
It could.
And if you like, we can also reach out to the mapping department for you and follow back up with you with an answer in reference to what is it actually running in time for them to do planning of one home or group homes.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Other questions? Land ideas, Emily, as far as what is exemptable. You were talking about vacant land, doesn't necessarily mean it's not used. And what I encourage people to do when they apply is when we talk about a photo, where a photo is very important, and we got to be careful because it's public record, what photos we put out there, certainly not children, et cetera. But a photo that shows use, we had a house years ago. The house, the organization applied on the house. It looked like a house from the outside. There was no way I knew what was inside, and I requested additional photos, or through Emily, if she wouldn't mind requesting that, just so we had an idea. And it came back in the living room area. They had put in pews, literal pews, where they were worshiping, and very clearly the use was there. If I had to worship in a house, I'm not sure if I would put in pews. I'd keep the couch there, but they were very happy with the pews, and it was very clear the use was very clear. And those types of things are very helpful. We cannot verify use on Sunday or Wednesday or at times Saturdays, at times when some of these things are being used. So those are great pictures for all of us to have. But on land, just very quickly, I know that the past few years, for instance, you've recognized community gardens. What are some other ideas that may be out there that you don't?
That's a tough question.
Can I answer that? I think Representative gave one of the examples because we've talked about this workshop for so very long.
Overflow parking, recreation, sports. Churches are going to a lot of times have recreational fields and things like that. That's pretty much what comes to mind.
One more question and then I might be done, but we do get a lot of these questions. One is, So the church was exempted on a parcel, maybe the main church parcel, but since then, obviously, things have changed. So if I got a community garden and I decide to have a once a month to sell what we grow, or that type of thing, income producing at some level, what do we need to do? I'm not asking for a determination from the bench, but if we have some sort of income producing activity on the parcel after it is approved, what measure do you want us to follow?
I think the best thing to do is just report it to my office. So just, like we talked about revocation. So if we think there's a use that's maybe not a qualifying use anymore, then I would reach out to that entity and say, hey, I've received this information and I need some clarification on what it is that you are doing. And sometimes it's not, we find out maybe it is income producing, but maybe it's, there's factors there that I would have to consider.
Sure.
But the best process is, if you're exempt and you do change the use of your property, you should reach out to my office. But as the assessor's office, if you obtain that information, then reach out and we can talk about next steps.
I hate to just keep, yes, sir.
I have a question. Just as we're sitting and talking. Organization has 2 or 3 houses that they normally use for their other activities, whether it's after-school tutorial or summer camp, but also make available for entities that want to rent the organization space, but the rent is not very high. And the reason I say it because I know that we had a conversation in our church about the fact that we didn't want to get into the, I'm trying to use the right term here, the UBIT, unrelated business income tax, right? So we would just charge a baseline of, okay, security cost us $30 an hour, you pay for security, and you cover enough to cover the light usage. But it's just to meet the basic expense we would have. Does that get into the realm of having to report to you all that we're using it this way and still would maintain some exemption or?
Yeah, I think that it could potentially, you probably should be reported, and then it could potentially be a situation where we go, well, how often is this happening? And do we need to maybe knock this down to a partial exemption then based on that usage?
Okay.
So,
And one of the things that came up on that was the registered parsonage that for the church, when we were going through our self-audit, we were doing our own self-audit, make sure we had all the information to ensure that everyone aware was exempted. And we found that the parsonage, they were just telling the truth about it, said that the person who was staying in the parsonage wasn't the pastor. The person who was staying in the parsonage was just getting money in church or whatever they can get, just whatever. Mm-hmm. And even that was something, possibly not. You can't do that. So we reached out to say,
always better safe than sorry.
there wasn't a lot of money. It's not a lot of money, but it did raise the red flag. It's a parsonage that goes running.
and there's time and space factors that we take in.
Yeah.
The example I gave before was we had a camp who had leased out a portion of its acreage for growing a crop. And so we were able to work with the organization and not only do a factor of acreage, but also of a growing season, determining what that was. And we're able to come up with a percentage, but it was less than the acreage simply because the growing season wasn't the whole year. So Emily, the state board, under the law, will work with anyone to try to come up with what is favorable. And I would imagine, just as Reverend Love would also indicate, there are typical uses of a church house. You expect to have a wedding, and what you have described is happens with weddings all the time. Sure, you can use our building if you would just provide the coverage, that's what we would call, I would think, a typical versus we're going to have a concert every month and sell tickets. I mean, is that a fair?
Yeah, and two, sometimes there's a de minimis factor. How often is this happening? But yes, you expect a church to have some weddings and receptions and showers and things like that. That's pretty common.
Anything else?
Well,
We're about to run out of time.
I was going to say this part is very important because as our city continues to grow and event space becomes more expensive at hotels and other places, I think what we'll find is our faith institutions who have space will start to be places that people will look to have a meeting, a retreat, a conference. And we need to be able to know that, up front tell you, hey, we don't do it often, but once a month, someone does ask to use the space for a meeting, and this is what we ask them to cover: security and a minimal amount for the lights and the water. But it's not the advertising of it. But I've noticed that uptick in the last 6 months, even while we were not renting our space out, when I use that term loosely, right, for events because of our COVID protocols. When we said at the beginning of the new year, we will reopen, there was a list of folks saying, okay, well, as soon as you make the fellowship hall available, let us know. Is the old parsonage available for us to have the baby shower, right? And so we'll find, I think, a lot of those smaller events, because of the nature of the high cost in our city to rent small spaces, you're going to find more baby showers, more events of that nature seeking out faith institutions, because most have some space that is available to be utilized.
And what Emily will do in that, she is the equalization comes up through that. It's recognizing someone is leasing the space and paying taxes, and a church is competing in some way with that.
Yeah. I guess my final comment on that would be, just a couple of weeks ago, I had somebody reach out to me and say, we're thinking about doing this, and it would be this many parking spaces, and it would be this amount of time. They had not entered into any kind of an agreement yet, but what she wanted to do was sort of a cost-benefit analysis to find out, is this worth it for us to do? So, we're happy to kind of assist there however we can so that entities can make those decisions.
Anything else? Assessor Will Hoyt, we'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you, John. And very good, very excellent questions being asked. And I do want to point out from our first inaugural exemption workshop, it had been identified that was a property that was not being used. And as a result of it, and it was the church, and as a result of that, we have provided that information to the State Board of Equalization. They have started the process of the possible revocation of that, of the exemption. But it's right there in front of your eyes. And of course, as we're beginning to do our visual inspections, because that's a part of the compliance division, is to do visual inspections of these various exemptions. And so we put a notice on the door, and it was brought to us by someone else. They just told us about it. And we had to do our due diligence in reference to going out to do a visual inspection. Great job, Robin. Great job. Emily, great job. Listen, let me just say this. By a raising of the hands, how many have found this exemption workshop informative? We're going to take this picture here. Keep your hands up. Awesome. And that's the objective. That was the vision of this workshop when it happened through the many challenges of our office. And then, of course, like I have to say, working with Reverend Representative Love in reference to his experience and then other experiences that followed, it was very important that we make sure that we are meeting people where they are versus always requiring them to come to us, which is a very good thing. Hey, let's give all of our workshop participants a round of applause. Thank you. Thank you so much, Emily Bennett. Thank you so much, Reverend Representative Love, and those who are here today. Please know that the Office of the Assessor of Property have conducted more than 150 outreach workshops to date since 2016. We believe that information is powerful as it helps the more than 500,000 Davidson County constituents make informed decisions and obtain critical property information. Thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule to be empowered. Remember, we value Nashville, Davidson County. We value you. Please visit our website at www.padctn.org. More improvement there to come of a website that's already being heavily enjoyed by many. Contact our office at 615-862-6080. And a last announcement, this is the time to appeal your values. If you would like to appeal your value of your property, this is the time to do it. And the deadline is April the 21st. Then you would, if you miss that deadline, it would be the next opportunity to appeal to the Metro Board, the independent Metro Board of Equalization. Visit our website for more information on this. We thank you so much, and thank you for joining us at the Assessors Workshop in conjunction with the Comptroller of the Treasury. Have a great evening.
This has been a service of the Metro Nashville Network. If you would like to see this presentation again, or for more information on this and other programs, visit nashville.gov.